On your seat, I'm just letting you know because I'm heading to this piece of paper at the back end of this message. We are going to be looking at this Nation Changes brochure. That will be at the end of what I do, so if you've got it underneath you, you might like to pull it out and have available for just now. And if we haven't met, my name is Steve, and a huge welcome to you, especially if you're visiting. I'd like to echo Steph's big welcome from earlier. Hope you have an amazing time here at Cityhill and that God does something in your life. There are two really interesting stories in the Bible. Well, there's lots of interesting stories. Two of them I'd like to pick out this morning. Both of them have got one verse in that I'm going to highlight and put on the screen in a bit. The first story is a guy named Cornelius, about a guy named Cornelius. His story is found in Acts chapter 10. The reason that story is in the book of Acts is because it was the first time that the gospel had been taken to non-Jews. Up until that time in the Bible story, the gospel had just been with the Jews. So this was the first time it went to the Gentiles. And there was this guy named Cornelius, but he wasn't just any guy, he was a Roman centurion. The Romans weren't held in that high regard by the Jews. They had invaded and taken over Israel, and Cornelius would have probably been stationed there in some military capacity, hopefully to prevent any uprising. That would have been one of his jobs. And it says in Acts chapter 10 that while he was praying one day, an angel appeared to him and said, Cornelius, God has heard your prayers. You need to send some guys to a nearby city named Joppa. They need to go to the house of a guy named Simon the Tanner. His house is by the sea. And at that house, you will find another Simon, a guy named Simon Peter. He was one of Jesus' disciples, or the apostles. And get that Simon to come in to talk to you. He'll tell you your next steps. Wow. How many of you had that in your last prayer time? An angel appeared to you and give you a house in a nearby town with a random stranger to invite to come and speak at your house. At exactly the same time that the messengers arrive at Simon the Tanner's house down in Joppa, Peter was busy praying, and he has this vision. And in the vision, God says to him, some guys are knocking at the door right now. You're going to go with them. Everything that's coming up is from me. Don't be afraid. They knock on the door. Peter says, how's it, guys? I'm coming with you. So he travels to Cornelius' house. They have an amazing time there. Cornelius greets them. I'm jumping to the end of the story. He's invited all his family and his friends. Peter preaches and he says, guys, you know it's not right for Jews to hang out with Gentiles. God moves in such a deep way. People are filled with the Holy Spirit, start speaking in tongues, begin prophesying. And in the middle of the story, when Cornelius is doing his introduction of Peter, or to Peter, he says this. This is Acts chapter 10, verse 31. Peter's now introducing himself, and he says, suddenly, a man in shining clothes, that's the angel, stood before me and said, Cornelius, God has heard your prayer and remembered your gifts to the poor. In the middle of this amazing story, Acts chapter 10, which is quite a long chapter, this verse, God has heard your prayers and remembered your gifts to the poor. Please keep in mind this verse. It's got the words remember and it's got the word poor in it. Remember and poor. The second story is from the book of Galatians, and in the book of Galatians, Paul is writing about some of his story. Now, you piece together all the different Bible bits about Paul, and he had an incredible encounter with God and on the way to Damascus. And he writes to the Galatian church, and he says, guys, I used to persecute churches. He's implying that he used to throw Christ followers into jail. He was pretty passionate about that. Then God met him, and he said, my life was changed. And then there were some doctrinal issues that came up, and he said, 14 years after all of that went down, I traveled to Jerusalem to meet with the apostles. Paul, you may remember, hadn't been with Jesus like the other apostles had. So he says, I went to meet with them just to double check my notes, my revelation, to see that we were all on the same page. And thankfully, he says we were. And then he finishes off his little story in Galatians 2:9 by saying this, James, Cephas, that's another word for Peter, and John, James, Peter, and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. They agreed that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the Jews. So they have this amazing meeting, and then this is the verse I'm honing in on. All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor. The very thing I had been eager to do all along. It's amazing in these two Bible stories that are so full of the gospel going forward, so full of God's work in the world and in the church, that these two ideas come up, remember and the poor. To Cornelius, and I just want to make a little Tissenhaki statement here, giving to the poor doesn't buy our way into heaven. Don't misread Cornelius' story. Giving to the poor is what we do when we've had a revelation of God. It flows out of our journey with Him, not to earn a way into heaven. So this angel says, God has seen your prayers and remembered your gifts to the poor. Then the apostles meet with Paul and they discuss all this big theology stuff, the doctrine, all of that's contained in Galatians and Romans. And then at the end it says they extend the right hand of fellowship and they say, Paul, you go and plant as many churches as you can with the Gentiles. Most of us in this room would be Gentiles. And they say, we've been called to go and do the same with the Jews. And then they say, just before we charge off to do this, please, Paul, don't forget to remember the poor. Remember the poor. And Paul writes, he says, and that was actually the very thing I was eager to do. Why does the Bible say, remember, with regards to poverty? Why are these two amazing little verses both got the words remember and poor, Possibly, it's because it's in many ways easier to forget or avoid poverty, pain, hardship in our world. I was reading a news article just a little while back about the first quarter of this year regarding unemployment in this beautiful country of ours. And it said this, the unemployment rate in South Africa rose to 27.6% in the first quarter of 2019 from 27.1% in the previous period. I have a job. That's a horrible statistic to read. And so sometimes it's easier to just flick over that or to just get a little bit unemployment still. 27.6% of adults in our country who would like to have a job don't. That's more than 1 in 4. One of the biggest problems, as far as I understand it, with unemployment, as part of that statistic, are people that have just given up looking for work. We were designed to work. We were designed to be economically profitable, if you read the Bible cover to cover. 27.6% of people in our country who like to be employed aren't. And Paul says, I was very eager to remember the poor. What about poverty statistics? There was a very comprehensive survey done in 2015, a document put out by Stats SA. They updated some of their figures in 2017. But we're talking about remembering the poor and doing something about it, not just bemoaning what happens in our country. Stats SA and the guys that work with these numbers have got 3 different levels of what they call poverty lines. In some ways it's an arbitrary line, but a line's got to be drawn somewhere. And these 3 poverty lines they use to measure economically what's happening in our country. The lowest of the lines they call the food poverty line. That figure of 531 Rand is a 2017 figure. They say that by their best stats, in 2017, if you as an individual earned less than 531 Rand per month, you would suffer some kind of starvation. 531 bucks. What does that even buy you by way of food? And the rest of that line, is what they measure to live under the food poverty line in South Africa. 25%. And just in case percentages didn't mean that much to us, they also put a human figure. 13.8 million people in this beautiful country that God has got such great purposes for. 13.8 million people live on less than 531 Rand per month. 13.8 million people living in some kind of starvation at some level. It's difficult to process figures like that. I think I got some reasons for the why. But I think for most of us, it's easier just to move forward and to go on to be with other people that would spend 531 Rand perhaps on a meal. I'm not saying this in any way to make us feel bad. The Bible says, remember the poor. Their second poverty line, they call the lower bound poverty line, is 758 Rand per month. 40%, which obviously includes the 25% below, 40% of people in our country earn less than 758 Rand a month. That's the when they speak about poverty line, that's the line. In terms of policy making, 21.9 million people living below that level of income monthly. And then the upper bound poverty line in 2017 was 1,138 Rand a month. 55.5% of our country has less income than that. 30.4 million people. I'm presuming, I'm going to make a little presumption here, that if you're living in this country, it's because you believe God has called you to live in this country. Not just because you were born here. Regardless of where your ancestors came from originally, I'm presuming that if you and I was born in this country, I'm here at this time because God has called us to be here at this time. If at any point He said somewhere else, in the country or in the world, we'd hope to follow His voice, okay? God doesn't have any economic problems, but this country does. All they asked was that we should remember the poor. The very thing I was eager to do. Cornelius, God has heard your prayers and remembered your gifts to the poor. What an incredible opportunity we have in Durban and in South Africa to remember the poor and to be part of God's answer and His solution into this country. I've got a couple of reasons why I don't think it's that easy to look or think about poverty, why poverty can be too painful to remember using these words. The first reason I think is that it's overwhelming. I don't know about you, but when I see any figure in the millions of people who can't afford to eat, not somewhere else, but here in this country, I feel overwhelmed. That just feels like a problem too big. Where do we even start? The second reason is possibly because it's painful. For most humans, if you're wired correctly, we don't like seeing others suffer. We don't like seeing pain. We're driving back from Johannesburg a couple of weeks back, and there was a car accident, and there were some bodies lying on the road, and it affected me. The traffic was all jammed up, and as we drove past and saw what clearly was pain, suffering, it affected me for the next considerable distance of that journey. I had these pictures in my brain. It's like, I don't know, it doesn't sit right to see pain. And poverty involves pain. Poverty involves suffering. So it's sometimes easier not to think about it because I want to avoid other people's pain. I want to avoid people's suffering. Another reason I think poverty is painful to remember is because it can leave us feeling guilty. There's a difference between being moved to action and feeling guilty. Sam and Nadine, who head up our Nation Changes NGO, work together with many other like-minded organizations. Periodically, I've been with them to different locations of where we're doing amazing things. I'm going to share some of those today. I find it very challenging to go into our home and sit down to have supper, knowing that many of the people that I've interacted with during that day are going home to no food. And so there's a certain level of guilt that can sit in our hearts when we think and remember poverty. I don't think it's meant to ever be guilt, but I do think we're meant to be moved to action. But if it's guilt that stops us from ever thinking about it, from ever remembering, we've got to do something about that. I'm not going to be burdened with guilt. That's not a godly emotion, but I'm not going to allow it to stop me engaging with the idea of poverty around me. And then fourthly, I think poverty can be painful to remember or engage with because often, whenever discussions around poverty arise, blame gets brought into the mix. And I suppose that's a fairly, again, human kind of reaction because blame gets brought into the mix whenever anything's going wrong in our lives. We look to blame here and there. And I'd like to suggest that if we're going to be part of the solution, I'm not in any way trying to ignore major causes, but I'm suggesting that if any of us blame or blaming anybody else, that never helps us move forward. Never helps us move to action. In fact, blame, guilt, pain, that feeling of being overwhelmed, it usually reduces our action. It usually leaves us with inertia instead of being willing to move forward and to engage. We're not called to live at any of those addresses, being overwhelmed, backing off because of pain, guilt, or blame. But the Bible encourages us so strongly to remember the poor. There are so many verses attached to this the big idea. One verse that I wanted to pick up on is from 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Now, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is all about generosity. It's all about giving. It's all about the grace of giving and how God wants to pour blessing into our lives to flow through our lives. And in the middle of Paul talking about this amazing grace, the idea of generosity, he says this about Jesus. So this is a summary of the gospel. He says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." Paul's introducing us to this idea is that actually physical poverty isn't the worst kind of poverty. Spiritual poverty is. And you can be multi-US dollar billionaire and be spiritually in poverty. And you can physically have nothing and yet spiritually be the billionaire. And Paul says the reason for that is because Christ, for your sake, gave up all the riches of heaven and he took on poverty. It's referring in a spiritual sense, by and large. He took on spiritual poverty so that you, that's you and I, could have his spiritual wealth. And Paul is saying, let that big idea stir you to engage with physical poverty as well as spiritual poverty. We are the most blessed people on earth if we have Christ. We are the wealthiest people on earth if we have Christ. I'm leaving physical aside for the time being. And because of that, because Christ saw fit to take on my poverty so that I could have his spiritual wealth, he engages my life. He grabs hold of us. He says, I didn't just rescue you to get a spot booked in heaven and the most comfortable life possible on earth. I've rescued you so that you can engage with my plans on earth, so that you can look at spiritual poverty and want to do something about it, and that you can look at physical poverty and want to do something about it. Christ in us should stir us to want to do something about it, because Paul says that's what Christ did. He did something about our spiritual poverty. We get to be part of the solution. We don't have to, we get to. I'm trusting and praying this morning that if that big idea doesn't already burn in your heart, that over this week and the next 2 weeks, it stirs more and more to say, I get to be part of the solution somehow, somewhere. That would differ for every one of us, what that exactly looks like. But I'm so grateful to God for people in this local church who say we are going to be part of the solution in very active ways regarding physical poverty. I've got a couple of stories that I wanted to share with you. This isn't the full breadth of everything we're involved in, but rather just drilling down into some amazing little stories of how we've been able to help people. And I say we, I'm talking us, been able to help people. The first story I'd like to share is of a young man named Paul Shandu. I think you've got that first picture. That's a picture of Paul. Paul is from Embo and was educated at Kabazela High School. His mother left him as a toddler, and he was raised in Embo by his father. He now lives with his 73-year-old grandfather, who's a night watchman in the area, but his grandfather suffered a stroke. Paul has come from poverty. One of our Nation Changes initiatives is giving extra lessons in certain subjects to grade 10, 11, and 12 students at Kabazela High School. Bill Williams started it, but Greg Daniel has volunteered his time every week during the school term. He's out near Kabazela High School giving these extra lessons and came to meet Paul. The level of education at Kabazela High is not that amazing, sadly. So we're adding into it, and it's not usual for matriculants there, any of them, to get distinctions. And yet Paul, very bright academically, managed to get 87% for physical science and 73% for maths when he matriculated. I think he matriculated 2 years ago, 2017. 2018, he wanted to go into tertiary studies, but he had a problem with his ID book. There's a very long, complicated story, which Sam and Nadine can tell you. But the net result of it was that no institution would accept him because he didn't have the right ID. Countless visits to Department of Home Affairs. Eventually, he got a document. Now his new ID is in process, and with the letter from Department of Home Affairs that Sam and Nadine helped him get, he was able to finally register at the end of last year. But the beautiful thing about Paul is that during that time, this a year of working out his ID problems, he wasn't just sitting around bemoaning his fate. As he said to Sam and Nadine, I want to come and volunteer with Nation Changes to help improve impoverished communities. And so on many days last year, if you had have come into the offices, you would have seen Paul. That's not him trying to escape, I don't think. He eventually got accepted at DUT to study chemical engineering. The most full of joy, incredible young man. An engineering company, we put out just some word that we were looking to help Paul, knowing what a great heart he's got and a heart of service and commitment. And an engineering company connected with this church has sponsored all of his tertiary education costs. He needed a laptop. A donor donated a laptop. He needed to be helped set up in Res. People donated stuff. That picture of him is his room at Res that Sam and Nadine went and helped him set up. And that smile is a guy who's waited a long time and is starting to see the beginning of his dreams come true. This next picture, you see a little bit of what he's hoping to do more of. That's Paul in the middle. This is part of his course, doing chemical engineering. One man, one person. There are millions more, but you've got to start and do something somewhere. And this is an amazing young guy that we wish him all the best. Another amazing young guy from Embo is a young man named Sisanda Noholoza. Sisanda's uncle, some years back, was actually on staff here at our church, oversaw our maintenance teams. But Sisanda came through Cityhill Embo. Through Nation Changes, they were able to engage with Sisanda, and instead of me telling you some of his story, I'm going to put up the video of Sisanda. This is about a 2-minute video. Sisanda telling you some of his story. I'll pick it up again after that. Over to you guys.
Okay, nation changes, it's helped me a lot. Like first, my English was very bad. I was scared to stand in front of people and preach the word of God. Um, my English was very bad, and then they took me to career links. They taught me English, how to communicate in English, how to read, how to write, how to do everything in English. That thing, it helped me a lot because when I'm teaching, I'm learning. My dream is to have businesses, having a lot of businesses around Africa. Like I want to own coffee shops, not just only coffee shops, like restaurants and everything, because they took me and then they teach me how to do cappuccinos and everything. So like it became my passion. And then and another thing is to have an orphanage and then an organization like Nation Changers, because I want to help people. I just want to learn more about sound. I just want to learn each and everything about sound, technical stuff and everything. I just want to say thank you so much, Nation Changers, for each and everything that you do for me, you done for me. As in like a person I was, now I'm a new person. I was a very shy person. I was a very, I couldn't talk to anyone because I never thought that I will be something right now, because like I'm involved at church, I'm doing sound at church. Like my dream is already starting, it's already starting to go, to grow. As in like everything that they've taught me, it's based on my dream. Thank you so much, Nation Changers, and thank you so much, church, for each and everything that you have done to me. Thank you.
So Sunday, why don't you come up to the front and join me? He didn't know I was going to do this. Just come quick if you don't mind. Once Sam and Nadine and Nation Changers had engaged with Sasanda, we realized that he had an exceptional aptitude for all things technical. And he is now on Cityhill staff as of last year. He works tirelessly, nothing is too much trouble. We're so blessed to see the incredible growth in your life, Sasanda. You haven't let your starting point determine where your end point is going to be. We pray God's rich blessing on you. Thanks for being a part of our team, for making the sound work here. Really appreciate it. Could we give him another big round of applause? If you've been here on any of the previous years where we've spoken about being Nation Changers, you'd have heard a whole lot of the different initiatives, work that we're doing into primary schools, preschools. We're passionate about education. The other interesting thing about Stats SA, their report is that they said there's a direct link statistically between education and unemployment. And some frightening statistics about how people without education end up in poverty, and people with education have got a much higher chance of not ending up in poverty. So most of our time is invested into education. A lot of the projects you'll see are together with schools that we're working at, preschools, primary schools, all over the place. But this big problem of unemployment has also just been knocking at our door. And we haven't, I don't think anybody's cracked the code, else it wouldn't be 27.6%. But we set out to push most of our energy towards education, and then this amazing initiative started up. You see, many of you have been so generous that every time you've got clothing, you've been giving lots of secondhand clothing away through Flourish Women's Conference, etc. We've got these boxes in the foyers. Throughout the week at our reception, people just bring in clothes. And so we've had a stack of clothes. We've had to add on some containers at the back here for all the stuff that we're doing through Nation Changes. And this clothing, Sam and Nadine, I refer to them because they're spearheading this whole thing, but had this bright idea, this initiative. What if we bagged these clothes? And one black bag of clothes, just random assorted clothes in good condition. If they're useless condition, we should be throwing them away. But clothes in good condition. We get a bag of clothes, and we had a couple of people that were very interested in doing this, people that were unemployed, is they would come in and we would give them their first bag of clothes. On a Wednesday morning, thanks, if you could leave that photo up. On a Wednesday morning every week, this clothing happens. It's now named the clothing box. And so the first bag of clothes gets given, and those people go and sell those clothes for whatever they choose to sell it for in their community, and then come back the next Wednesday to buy another bag of clothes, but the second bag they pay for, $50. And so this starts effectively in a business for them. It's entrepreneurial. It's in the employment space. And every week people are coming back, buying a bag or maybe 2 bags of clothes, $50. We've got about 13 or 14 registered shoppers. The shoppers have each got a card. I think that's on the next slide. A card like that. That's Petronella and Lovu's card. Clothing box card, so that when they come in through our gate and working with Sam and Nadine, it's not just a free-for-all. These are people that we have vetted and entrust with this process. I don't want to get this fact wrong, from July last year, so less than a year, we have sold 925 bags of clothing. And I'm using the word sold because this is now, it's sitting in the business space. We are giving, donating in, but it's priming the pump. Some of these ladies have been able to make between 900 and 3,500 rands worth of profit per month through on-selling clothes. 925 bags of clothes. You know how much clothes you guys have donated? Well done. We've had factories donating clothes with just a little, some small thing wrong. There's a sewing program that started to help people learn how to fix up those clothes. Some very creative fixes have been done on them. But then we received some really high-end type donations of pretty new clothing. And Sam Jort, who's been running with this, decided to have a second part to the clothing box and has set up an entire container at the back. If you could just flick onto the next picture. You can see those clothing racks in that picture. Those are all clothes pretty much close to new on clothing hangers. And the most trusted of the shoppers that have had to prove themselves over a period of, I think, 6 months, they get access to shop per garment. So they're not just getting a bag of assorted clothes. And the shoppers that shop like this, on those garments, there's a price tag per garment. It's not a very high price, but it's a price. And they've got to figure out, with the money that I've brought, which garments do I buy and what profits can I make. Sam has taken each of her shoppers and taught them basic bookkeeping skills in a book, how to record their purchases, the cost of purchase, their selling price, and what the profit will be. And then every week checks in with the shoppers to help them figure out and move this forward. This thing has snowballed and got such momentum that they are buying in bales of clothing to try and help move this whole system forward of creating, if you like, basic employment for people. One of our shoppers is a lady named Nellie. Nellie got very, very sick some years back. For some years was without any form of income. Nellie came to hear about the clothing box and came to be one of the shoppers. We recorded a short video clip of Nellie telling some of her story. If you guys wouldn't mind playing that now, please.
Okay, I'm Nelly Gomede. I'm married. I've got 4 kids. I've got 4 children. I started to be here, I think it's 2 years ago. And I'm happy because my stock is selling very well. I can manage now to put food on the table because I'm a breadwinner. I was working retail shop. I left in 2007 because I was sick. I was suffering with suffering with my both knees. I stayed at home about 6 years. After that, I went to Cityhill Church, Embo. I spoke to Mom Angie, and she told me about I must come here to get a clothes at Cityhill Hillcrest. I came at Cityhill Hillcrest. Sam and Nadine, they will come with a good smile and ask me what they can help me. I told them, I explained everything. That time I started, I think it's 2 years or 3 years ago. And that clothing box helped me very well. I'm very happy because I can manage now a lot of things. I can give my kids a better education, and now I try to build my house with this money and helping me very, very well. And I want to say thank you, God, to get the people like this to help us like a poor people. I was poor, but now I'm not poor, I'm rich.
Nellie is our guest at church this morning. I'm not going to ask you to run up to the stage, Nellie. You told us in the video you've had bad knees, but this is Nellie Gumede. And we want to just welcome you and honor you for the great work that you're doing. Thank you for coming to church with us this morning. And this is Sam, right next door to her, and Christo. Thank you for all of your help. You put in a lot of effort behind the scenes with Sam as well. Thank you. Final little story before heading on to that brochure. One of the great needs that we've identified with education is hunger. While many suburban children are arguing with their parents over what they're going to have for breakfast, and in their school box lunches, many of the schools that we started working into, many of the children were arriving with no food for the day, having had no breakfast. An organization named JAM, J-A-M, Joint Aid Management is what it stands for, distribute this high-protein, very nutritious porridge for children's breakfasts. As far as I can remember, they do about 1 million meals per month. They have some European funding. I was in a church in Germany last year. I was sharing a story of some of what I'm going to say now. And a lady came up to me afterwards with tears in her eyes. She said, for years, I've donated a few euros every month for jam porridge. And I never knew any of the recipients on the other side. I just did it by faith. And now, in the photo that you showed, I saw that we had your kids were eating some of the food that we've been supplying. She was overcome just to hear on the other side of the world how her faith had landed here. But added to that porridge that we one of the distribution points for them is Nadine realized we needed to do more, and so started wanting to provide lunches at schools for children. This idea of lunches and food grew and grew because there are many people in the different areas we're working into where hunger is a big deal. So together with Murray, that's Nadine's husband, Murray is the official buyer of all of the product that goes in here, sources it, makes sure. So there's a recipe in here that includes soy mince, it includes rice. There's a whole lot of other stuff. It's packed with goodness in this little packet. And we distribute enough food to feed 17,000 meals or 17,000 people per month through these Nation Changes food packs. All of those meals, also there's sponsorship that's coming directly for those meals, but I think that's pretty special to not just be reading about poverty line statistics, but to be doing something very small towards it. We had this idea when we were putting this series together. The Bible says, remember the poor. Remember, remember, remember. And we thought, how can we remember? How can we think about it? And we've come up with a great idea. I think it's great, and I'm sure you'll tell me afterwards if you disagree with it. In fact, if you disagree, just tell somebody else. Let me just think it's a great idea, okay? I just realized there I was opening myself up to 100 conversations I didn't actually want to have. I'm just kidding. Everyone here is so loving and kind. We have packed enough extra meal packs to give every single family that's here today one of these for you to take home with you. So you can collect it at any of the Connect stations on the way out. We gave these out to our staff a little while back, and Jax took this meal pack, and we ate the most hearty meal. I'll come back to that in a minute. This pack was originally designed to feed 4 people. I'd like to tell you that in our family, we've got 2 adults, a 14-year-old who has shot up and is eating a lot, and a 12-year-old who's about to shoot up and he eats a lot. Jax took this food. We committed to not adding any meat to it, to make it a vegetarian meal. So we added some vegetables. I think Jax, it's got soya mince in it already. Some other people cooked onions up, added this, added some spices. And in fact, Nadine, for, I think it was Murray's birthday, took this food and made these like risotto type balls as part of the meal. Everybody was congratulating her on what amazing culinary skills she had. She said, that's the food we're giving out. It's good stuff. So we took it home. We ate as much as we could. So we cooked it all up one shot. The 4 of us ate as much as we could. At least the same amount was left over for another meal. The cost price of one of these packets is just under 13 Rand. That would feed 8 of us easily for 2 meals. So this is food. We just feel like this is such a great idea to get food out to all the places that it's needed. I'm not saying you need this, but I'm inviting you to take this and make a vegetarian meal this week. But don't just eat the food. We're suggesting that when you take this food and you eat it, that you pause and remember. And pray for our country and pray for our city. And if you've got kids sitting with you at the table, pray for the 13.8 million people who live on less than 531 Rand a month. And that's not enough to buy food. And God, we thank you for this food. And we ask that we'd be part of the solution. One lady in the church, she did a meal on the floor. She introduced a whole lot of other cultural elements into it that are different to her family's culture, helping her kids figure out that some people eat food differently to how her family eats food. What a great opportunity just to take it and say, God, thank you for food, but we want to be a blessing. This is our way of remembering. Now, there's no cost attached to this. Please take. But if you'd like to contribute, 13 Rand per pack, whatever, any contribution you'd like to make financially, there'll be boxes on each of those Connect stations. It's not payment. It's just a donation. This has been donated to you. That money that's coming back and will just go straight back into the food to other people. Does that make sense? So that's a present for you on your way out to help us remember. Each year for the last, I think this is our 4th year that we've done this, we've been asking the question, how can we get more involved and create opportunity for us to do more things? And so we've had these Nation Changers projects, which in partnership with the NGOs we work with, we've looked for a date, a time. We need volunteers. Some of them need money and no people. Others need people and no money. Others need both. And we are hoping to, I'll just give you the headlines up front. We are hoping to, from the 12th of July to the 12th of August, in that month, to do 50 different projects that need 520 volunteers and looking to raise about 250,000 Rand. The cost of all these projects comes to about 250,000 Rand, the cash that we need in for it. And then the dates, just for your information, 12th of July to around about the 12th of August. We refer to that loosely as Nation Changers Month. Hopefully we're changing lives all throughout the year. And this is just some feedback from the last couple of years. The momentum that's been generated in the other 11 months has been absolutely astonishing. I've had business people say to me, they have decided as a business to contribute into Nation Changers. This is separate to their personal tithes. One business person in particular said, we've been putting this money in. God has done so much in the rest of our lives in our world. That's the one thing that we're not even negotiating of whether we change that amount. We're just putting it in faithfully every month because God has blessed us in so many other ways. So this is just a very small bit of the large stuff that all the rest of the year that we're doing. But it's a start. It's somewhere. I also would like to just make a comment about that Rand amount. Some people might look at it and say, well, that's pretty big. But if you're here in our last 2 years, you'd say that's a little less than we raised last year and the year before. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first and biggest reason is this. is this isn't all we're going to be doing with Nation Changes in the next 12 months. The need that has arisen around packing and distributing the food, the skills training, the clothing box, the space requirements have grown and mushroomed, and we're busy drawing up plans. They are on the cusp of being submitted to build a distribution center off the back of this building that ties into the bank. At the same time, so that will all be Nation Changes space. At the same time, there's some toilet additions that the ladies have been asking for. We've heard your cries. We are planning on adding a whole lot of extra ladies' toilets left and right. And then our offices, as things have grown and increased, we've run a little short on office space. So that number comes out with a lot of zeros. It hasn't been complete, it hasn't gone out to tender yet. But I'm going to be coming back, I'm just giving you a heads up, with a big building project idea, some big numbers that the eldership team we've been talking about. We're really excited. So this is Nation Changes month, and then we're going to have a Nation Changes big building project. Okay, so I'm teeing you up for that as well. If you were here over the last couple of years, you've got a good idea how this will work. But for those that this is your first year at Cityhill, each of these projects, there are 50 of them altogether. They're not in number order, they're grouped together according to category. Ministry, outreach, or donation in kind. The next block is feeding. The next block relates to maintenance, skills development, education, and infrastructure. Maybe I could start with infrastructure because it's where the most expensive blocks are, the blocks with the highest cost. The first one is Isambulu College, build a creche classroom for 90 grand. That's the biggest one on the, I'm just letting you know, that's the biggest amount, obviously, of the 250. But I'd like to show you a couple of pictures of Isambulu. Isambulu it's about a 25-minute drive from here. If you go out past Shongweni Dam, out that way, it's kind of a semi-rural area. Very high need for education, from preschool right through to matric. A lady named Nene Shange, together with a guy that works with her, Sandile Komo, have started the school from very small beginnings. And over the last few years, we have engaged because it's been such fruitful ground to work in. If you guys don't mind just putting up a couple of those photos. Over the last couple of years, we have built 4 classrooms, an ablution block, a storeroom, jungle gyms. We've fenced her entire property, added classroom furniture, cupboards, and we're not just giving. They have done a huge amount of work themselves. On some of the projects, they've got to a certain level and we've finished them off. So it's been a real partnership. That's a picture of some of the jungle gyms and the classroom block in the background. If you go to the next one, that's an aerial view. You can see that's fencing that Nation Changes has done, the jungle gyms. These 2 buildings in the front of the picture, those are buildings we've set up, and there's a toilet block out of sight here, which all the children there, I mentioned this last year, were going to the toilet just out on the felt grass. And we were able to build this beautiful toilet block. I went out and had a look at it. Just so, can I use this word in the right? Just so proud of what we've been able to be involved in. Their junior primary, foundation phase kids, have got 84 children in one classroom. Sorry, not preschool, that's 1 to 5-year-olds. 84 children in one classroom. So we are wanting to build them a new creche classroom. That's this project, Nation Changes project number 15. We're also wanting to extend some of the shelving in 3 of the classrooms. That's the next one down. We're wanting to extend the fencing because of their growth. That's number 22. The 6th one down, decorate the classrooms, and the second to last one, all refer to Isambulu. This is all this great project that we've been in, and we feel that it's deserving of our continued efforts. So a lot of infrastructure we've paid for in previous years. This year, this is some of the big infrastructure stuff. The rest is a slightly smaller type effort project. I'd like to just highlight a couple, and just to let you know up front how we're going to land. When we're done with the service, at this table on the left, there are going to be a whole lot of people there that are they're waiting for you to go and sign up and saying, I'm taking one of these projects. Okay? So if any of those big headings stand out to you, maintenance or education, skills development, why don't you scan down and just say, God, where would you like my company to get involved in? Life group leaders, where would you like my life group? Or as an individual or a family, where would you like me to get involved this year? If we've got multiple sign-ups for the same project, even better. The first one, top left, wheelchairs and cushions. These are pretty expensive wheelchairs at 4,000 Rand each. I'd like to explain that they are designed to specification. The guys at this, the people at this care home can't just have a wheelchair that's bought off the shelf at Discam. These are wheelchairs. Nadine, it just blows my mind. Added to all the other stuff, she's already changing the world. And she tells me last month she went on a wheelchair maintenance course to learn how to build and maintain wheelchairs. So, like, this is not just a random figure. We have our own wheelchair specialist. These are the wheelchairs that are needed. Okay, so 16 grand towards that. Hillcrest, the second one, prayer time with toiletry handout. So you would gather 7 of your friends or your life group. You buy some toiletries. You go to the Hillcrest Aid Center Trust. Get blown away by the work that they're doing there. Have a prayer time. Give the toiletries. So it's a bigger one and a small, cost-wise smaller. Cityhill Children's Village, Activity Day in Braai. Get 15 volunteers to do some fun activities, crafts, games, sport, and have a braai together with the kids. Most of these children at Cityhill come here to Cityhill Church on Sundays. I think there are 53 children at Cityhill Children's Village. We went out there with our family a little while back. Just had such a whale of a time recognizing all the children who come to church. Amazing, amazing job that's happening out there. St. Mary's Hospital maternity bag handout. I'm jumping to the feeding. NCO2, Turning Point Feeding the Homeless. 50 volunteers donate 50 Rand each towards the food for the homeless in Durban City Centre. It's a 2.5 grand project. You might say, hey, I'll just be the one person, but you might have a group of people say, we'd like to get involved in that, 50 people. The next one is the meal packing, to pack these meals and to contribute a little towards some of the costs of those. All of them are of this kind of nature. Maintenance. If you're handy or you've got a group that prefer getting out, getting hands dirty, why not sign up for one of these maintenance type projects? Lily of the Valley Maintenance Day, Smiley Kids is a preschool that we work into, Embo Educare, etc. Skills development, that box, you can see it. We're needing 5 sewing machines. We're having these amazing sewing courses that are running out back here. And we're wanting to train people up on essentially help them start a business. Praying for shoppers that come to our clothing box. And that's Nelly together with all of her friends that come there. Education. Just as I'm looking at these, I'm remembering some groups in this church doing some of these events last year. The fun that was had at Pushani Primary School, a Bombo hygiene and dental lesson, painting easels, plastic bikes. This is one of the big cost item, NC27, 50 grand to complete the building of these classrooms. Maybe I'll finish off with this one. At Ntando Yenkosi, it's a creche that we've started working with. A lady there started a creche in a double garage. She's now got 47 children in that double garage. She is doing a good job. They've started building 2 classrooms. We want to help them finish those 2 classrooms and build a 3rd classroom so that it goes from just 47 kids crammed into a double garage into a little school that is more highly functional. The cost of that, we reckon, will be around 50 grand. It will also include some of the toilet facilities there. We might not be able to change everybody's situations, but let's start somewhere. Last year I closed off with this story, and I'd like to use it again. It's a story of the man who, walking along the cliffs at the ocean, looks down and sees another man down the bottom picking up these stranded starfish. Every starfish that didn't make it back into the water would obviously die. Young man's walking along the beach, picking up one starfish at a time, and as he picks it up, he throws it back into the water. This man walks down the pathway from the tops of the cliff down to the bottom, and he engages with this younger man, and he says, I see you rescuing starfish. He says, yep. And he says, why do you bother? There's so many thousands of starfish here. Surely you can't hope to make a difference for all of them. The young man picks up another starfish, and he says, maybe not. But I made a difference for that one. As a church, we might not be able to solve poverty in South Africa and the entire continent, but we can make a difference for the next person and the next person and the next person. A small way of making a difference is through these nation changer projects, but changing our nation goes way beyond just those things.